Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 270 of The Art of Procurement. So I'm your host, Philip Ideson. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I'm actually recording this introduction from Scottsdale in Arizona, where I'll be coming along to ProcureCon Indirect West, which just starts here in a couple of days. So if you are coming to ProcureCon West, just let me know, and hopefully we can connect while we're on site. Okay, so I'm joined today on the pod by Mahmood Shah. Mahmood is Director of Global Procurement at MetLife. And Mahmood started his career in supply chain in the automotive and then airline industries before making the switch to procurement and financial services. He's also worked on both sides of the direct and indirect spend line. Now, Mahmood's experience and point of view are really critical for any procurement organization, weighing the benefits and the challenges of full digital transformation. So that doesn't just mean taking the source to pay process online. It requires the leadership team to really explore and employ the full advantages of bots and robotic process automation, or RPA. What I love about our conversation is that Mahmood and his team at MetLife are using bots to increase the efficiency of their sourcing process, among other processes, to be honest with you, but we're really focused on the sourcing process. And so we talk about how to turn the hype of RPA, all the marketing of RPA, actually into actions. So Mahmood shares his experiences and his keys to success. And actually his number one key to success might actually be different than what you may expect. Now, if you've been listening to Art of Procurement over the last few weeks, you're going to know that Tradov has been very generous to sponsor the show. So Tradov is a B2B platform that connects buyers and sellers across the world. And one of the things that you can do with Tradov is actually build your own private network or community. You can do that for free. So for example, one that brings together just your procurement team, where you can share information, post thought leadership, and start discussions among your team. So you're really in control of who can join that private community that you create. Well, we're actually creating a private group just for Art of Procurement listeners within Tradov. So we're going to post the podcasts and articles that we come across that we think will help you on your journey to elevating the impact of procurement. Now, all you need to do to actually join the Art of Procurement's private community within Tradov is to go to artofprocurement.com/Tradov. You can click the join for free button, and then on logging in, you'll be directed to a page to request access to the Art of Procurement private community. Our team will then let you in, we'll do the rest. So as a reminder, that's artofprocurement.com/Tradov. Okay, so I started the conversation with Mahmood by asking him the question that I often ask procurement practitioners, and that's if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
I would say that I've worked for several years in supply chain management in both the automotive and airline sector. I used to work for BMW Group and for British Airways as well. And I wanted to gain procurement experience to kind of round off my work experience and also make myself more marketable at the time. And I was fortunate enough to get that opportunity whilst working at BA's for BA's procurement department, managing hardware and airport systems, and that positive experience has kept me in this profession to date as well.
What was it? So if you said you came in really through the supply chain route, what was it about procurement that, was it just you thought, I'll check the procurement box, or was it, this seems from afar like something that looks really interesting?
So I think a couple of things. One is, within supply chain management, I did actually do some buying, as it were. So, I used to buy all the cabin interiors for the aircraft, for example. But procurement was always the folks that looked at it from a very strategic perspective. I was more of a tactical buyer. And I wanted to get that kind of experience to say, well, they're at the table negotiating the deals, and it sounded kind of cool at the time when I was in supply chain. And then also, whilst I looked externally in the broader marketplace at the time, and this is particularly in the UK, if I was looking at any broad-based supply chain kind of role, procurement experience was paramount within that as well, and I didn't have it.
And I know when you came over into procurement, you've worked in both direct and then indirect. I think you started in direct, didn't you, with was it with BA you started with in direct procurement? And then moved over to indirect. What was your experience of moving between direct to indirect?
I think it might also be the industries as well, to be honest. So I've worked in financial services now as well, and I think the difference is within Direct, I had, there was no fight to get a seat at the table.
Yeah.
I was actually at the table. There was a very clear understanding as to what my roles and responsibilities were, and how I was going to deliver and support most of the account teams that were there as well. So I did that. I worked at a retail marketing company at Bezier as well, where I worked very closely with account teams. We had goals whilst we worked with, let's say, a supermarket that's owned by Walmart. They have 300 stores in the UK, and a large part of that was working with the account teams to understand where they were headed, where they were, feedback from losing RFPs and building that into the category strategies that they actually had as well. So I think there's a more, it's easier to track your savings, realize bottom line savings within Direct than there is, let's say, within Indirect. There always seems to be a fight, if you like, to try and convince someone that you've actually saved them some money.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked the question because I kind of took that journey as well. I did the direct side starting in automotive, and actually worked in indirects in automotive as well. It was within the automotive industry. I made the jump and then went from auto into a bunch of other industries as well. And, the one thing I think that really serves you well when you're in direct is still, even though you have that mandate, focus on the relationship. Because that's your transferable skill, isn't it? If you don't have that, you're going to fail. You're going to go flat on your face when you go into the indirect, where it really is all about influence and persuasion.
I agree. Sure.
Now, I want to have a little chat about, you're doing some really interesting things at MetLife around the digital procurement transformation. And, I think as we go on with the conversation, I think there's some specifics that I'd love to talk to you about. But just to kind of set the context a little bit, how are you approaching this idea, this notion of digitization, which is so overused as a term, but I guess it's because it's so, it's so prevalent in the way that we're transforming ourselves. How are you approaching digitization at MetLife?
So I'll give you, MetLife in general, we've got a whole automation center of excellence that defines what our automation strategy should be. And then it's actually built into the corporate strategy as well, about being digital, simplified, one MetLife. It's all built within our refreshed corporate strategy, and it's there to help us realize. I think there was a target of around $800 million by 2019, by the end of 2019, and so that's a large lever that we're actually looking to utilize as part of our cost savings initiative as well. But I think my own personal experience, my own personal vision for procurement, as it were, for digitization is to really develop procurement so it has more personalized and self-service options. That's my personal vision for procurement and where I see it going today. We have software today that can automate, many of the mundane tasks, intelligence reports, and kind of allow our profession to focus on more strategic activities. But what I tend to find today is that, we're still talking to people where they're talking about automating the current way that they do things. And there's no real sense of, well, what are those freed up resources going to be doing, and how they're going to support you. And I think digital transformation programs are springing up all across different procurement departments everywhere, can absolutely positively change procurement's value proposition. But whether we as procurement professionals allow it to do that or not is a different matter.
Yeah, I want to go into that in a little bit, because that's, to me, that's like the $64,000 question, as well as, how do we actually take advantage of the opportunity? But if I go back, one thing I just want to point out is it sounds like it's been important for MetLife and your ability to do some of the things that you're doing, because you have top-down support. There's corporate strategic initiative to really take digitization seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, like I said, it's part of our corporate strategy, and then not only that, we have an excellent center of excellence headed up by Owen O'Reilly, who manages all of the automation that we have corporate-wide as well.
So when we think about self-service, are there any boundaries on what we should be looking to devolve back into the business? I think I want to help us think about the art of the possible, and not just think within the constraints of our current kind of what procurement does, and let's just help the business do some of those things. Like, is there a case for almost everything we do being devolved back into the business using technology so that we, what procurement looks like may be a completely different animal than what it looks like today, or is that just going too far?
No, I don't see why not. I mean, I saw a video the other day of one of the Amazon stores where folks walk in, scan their card, go in, pick whatever they want, and walk straight back out of the actual building itself. And they've got, machine learning, got cameras, they've got all of these things looking at what you're procuring, and it's already billed you. And for me, why can't things be that simple?
Yeah.
Right. So when I look at what we're doing over here, yes, many of the things I believe can devolve back within the business. You could end up saying, bots could negotiate with bots.
Yeah.
You could even get to that stage. You can have, as far as I'm concerned, you can have procurement people at a very high level coaching other folks within the business to negotiate, to help them set the strategy and help them define what the playbook should look like, and take a much more strategic view as to what deals they're going to be helping the company negotiate and what their objectives are going to be. It could end up being a much different kind of, I think, a very different kind of experience for procurement professionals in the very near future.
Yeah, I feel like to get there, we have to give up this idea of control. To be able, even to be able to start mapping out what a future could look like using technology. The preoccupation we have with things like spend under management, it's all about getting our arms around as much as we possibly can because that's the way that we provide our value. Now, that's obviously a lot to unpack just in that statement, because there's a lot of things we need to do to position ourselves in an organization where they see us as having a different value proposition. But I do think it starts with mindset.
I agree. I mean, when you think about organizations and what some of the larger ones, they may have 40 or 50 key metrics that help them run the business, right? And of those, how many can procurement align themselves to? And usually it's one, which is the savings number, right? There are others there, maybe some of the risk pieces there as well, but predominantly that's the number one area that most people focus on. But, until you can talk in a language that the business understands and they get to see the actual value of what you're bringing to the table over and above any types of savings, I think that's the key for me.
Mm-hmm. So, as an organization, you've made that decision that we're going to invest in, or we're going to start exploring new ways of business that are enabled with technology, new ways of business from a procurement perspective enabled by technology. While I appreciate there's no single answer, like what's the thought process that goes through deciding where to even start?
I think I having gone through this, I did sit down and reflect upon what I would have done differently and the areas that I'd focus on. And I would say I would start with a services catalog. Our reason for being that services catalog would define all the different services that procurement provide to the business.
Yeah.
And what that helps us to do is when you're running any types of assessments and you're looking to get any kind of metrics, it allows you to, the services catalog kind of allows you to realize unit costs. And you can really benchmark those findings, and it helps when you're trying to build a business case to present it in a much easier format for people to understand what the benefits are that you're going to realize. So for me, it starts with creating that services catalog if it doesn't exist, and then having everything from saying how much what the current state looks like, how many FTEs you've got, what the cost is of delivering that service across the business, and then you can start looking at, well, what would happen if I standardized this, and then what would happen if I started putting in some type of automation. And that's MetLife's procurement approach was really to look at 4 areas. I think it was one was process improvements. We also looked at, unified technology where we already have technology. How can we better leverage what we have?
Yeah.
where can RPA help, and where can some other forms of intelligent automation support some additional effort as well. And they're not all mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of approach we've taken when we've looked at assessing our processes across source to pay within MetLife.
And so that services catalog is really just every service that you as a procurement function provide to the business.
Yes, I mean, we didn't do that, but I think that makes more sense. If we started there and then built on the actual assessment, it really helps align the work that you're doing to the actual services catalogs, because ultimately that's the service that you're providing that the business sees as well.
Yeah. Now, as you start to do that, one of the things that I wonder is, does that lead to doing things in a silo? I'm going to do a bot to do this one process over here, and I'm going to go and do something over there? Or how do you kind of make sure it's all coordinated and joined up, and that it's part of a bigger strategy, if you will, as opposed to just
right.
Trying things out kind of here and there without it necessarily being coordinated?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've taken the approach where we've done a thorough assessment regardless of where these opportunities reside to try and identify a heat map of what this would look like, and then we've helped create an opportunity register, and all this would then go back to saying, do you have a vision? Do you have an automation strategy, and what does that as part of that vision? What does the roadmap look like? And what are your measures of success going to be? And those items will help you prioritize what you're looking to implement as well. So there are things that you can do to work out, whether one automating a particular process is better than automating another. You can help define all of those criteria and create this prioritized list, which is what we're doing. But the strategy would really drive your focus, which is, what are you hoping to accomplish? What's the goal here? Is it to improve customer experience? Is that the number one? It's usually several different things, but there's always leading and lagging items there, priorities there. Is it reducing the risk? Is it actually realizing the efficiencies? It could be several of these, and that's really what drives your prioritization in your opportunities as well. But you need that roadmap. Otherwise, otherwise you're just going to have a list of opportunities, and every time you can have to try and figure them out. Yeah,
and it's important that it's there's a number of different outcomes you try to drive. That it isn't just we're doing this because it's going to save us money. We're doing this because it's an efficiency play. While that may be an important kind of factor, it's company to company based on the objectives of the company. What can you do that align with what the business needs from you, as opposed to just I'm going to be able to implement this bot, and that's going to free up X number of work hours or X number of FTEs or whatever it may be.
Right, and usually what happens, and I know we've talked about this before, which is for me it's the change management aspect of it, which is that's one aspect, is configuring it, putting the bot in place, but do you actually have a good change management plan to help implement that?
Now, do you feel that change management is kind of as important, if not more important, than the technical side of doing the change, of bringing in the technology? It's about how the people are going to react and work with that technology.
Yes. In my experience, I believe that to be the key part to any type of implementation. You can look at assessing processes, identifying them. That usually takes some time, but the actual configuration doesn't. The configuration of the bots don't. And then you really hit with the realization of, well, what next? How do I actually put this in place and get people to actually come on board and start using this as well? And that's where I think a lot of time and effort should be spent prior to any type of implementation, saying, this is the plan for communication. This is the plan for how we're actually going to implement these over what period of time. Those are the kinds of things that I think are important.
Yeah, and so what kind of messaging would you give to your employees who are worried about the fact that we're going to bring in a bot and it's actually going to be taking work that you do today away from you? How do you give them some confidence that you're not just doing this to get rid of jobs, for example?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the actual. Like I said, it starts off. For me, there's several aspects for change management, right? And within that, if I was going to message anything, you should be communicating early and often as part of any type of program. And if you've gone through the assessments with the same folks, because what we tend to do is have the subject matter experts as part of workshops to understand what their processes are and where those opportunities reside. Most of the folks are actually helping you understand that as well. So I'm working with the team that are actually telling me, here are some of the areas where I'm frustrated. Here's some of the areas where it takes X amount of time for me to do that. So if you can work with them, and most of the, in fact, all of the automation that's developed is done in an agile fashion. So as you're developing it, you can work with them to show them this is what we've done. How does this look? And we had someone on the team that was from the sourcing team, if you like, as a representative to try and work with them to develop some of the automation that we put in place to get their feedback as we were doing it.
So you'd work quite a bit in a sandbox environment then before you go into production to kind of demonstrate all the different changes and to also play around with what it can do.
We had two things going on at the same time. We were implementing Ariba's guided buying front end user interface as well as RPA, and the guided buying piece we worked heavily with each of the category leads. The automation, we selected one point of contact within sourcing, and we worked with them throughout the actual project.
Yeah. Now, when you look at an automation, I'm sure this is a question you get asked all the time. And I'm not sure even how important a question it is in the big scheme of things, because I think change is probably more important than this. But, what are you looking for in a provider when you think, okay, I'm going to bring a provider on board to help me with automation? What should people be looking for the first time they're doing this?
In terms of, I think there's a lot of good providers out there, to be honest. And I personally liked someone that would, you want someone with, for MetLife, we were looking at, do they have a global footprint?
Yeah.
Are they a preferred supplier? Were they one of the main suppliers within our center of excellence? That's very key. So our COE has already established a preferred supplier list, as well as who they want to work with. And they've already gone through that kind of work effort, which makes it easier for the rest of the business when they're looking to work with any kind of suppliers as well. The COE tend to have already decided what they want from an organizational perspective, rather than just a procurement view. But from a procurement's perspective, it's also to understand, have they done this type of work before? And honestly, usually the answer is no. Right. Procurement's probably not the first area that most organizations are looking to automate as well. So that can be kind of difficult. Yeah. But if they've got like a procurement practice, they can provide that experience. If they've and it's usually the teams that are looking to come on board as well. I've had a very good experience with the suppliers that we used as well.
Now, and that's a good point from a procurement perspective. This is something I talk about quite a lot on the show, is that, the fact that all this, the new technologies that are coming in that are really helping redefine the procurement business model, or sorry, not the procurement business model, the enterprise business model, are coming from the outside. And as a conduit with outside partners, we're in a really good position, if we have the ability to take advantage of that, to be enabling so much of this change. So, do you see the procurement involved from a more traditional perspective, sourcing, supplier management, all those things in helping the rest of the organization select their providers? Or is this, because of the nature of MetLife, really just being decisions driven through a COE?
No, we've worked with the COE in setting up the RFP process, helping them establish who they were going to be working with. It gives us insight into how the selection criteria, was put in place to determine preferred suppliers, and then what tends to happen is, as any COE grows over time and they're looking to scale, initially they start off small and they're reliant more on the third parties, and they then bring that kind of expertise in house and grow it and are less reliant further down the line on some of the third parties. And our COE in general is looking at a federated model approach, where certain aspects of the roles and responsibilities can reside back within the business as well. And we've got a kind of hybrid model going on at the moment with them as well. So there's parts that we're looking at which is the assessment and configuration and the COE provides production support.
One of the things is I just want to touch on change for the last time. I see that when you're talking about new technologies, whether you're talking about bots that are doing things that a human may have done in the past, that it kind of reminds me of outsourcing all over again. I think of it as like outsourcing 2.0. So where before, you were taking business processes and nearshoring them or offshoring them, now you're doing the same, but it's just technology rather than a nearshore or an offshore resource that's actually doing the doing. And so from a change management perspective, you need to go through exactly the same rigor that you would do when you're going through an outsourcing program. And I think sometimes we miss that, because it's a technology. We just think, well, it's just a technology implementation.
Yeah, and usually you're holding someone else accountable.
Yeah.
And now you're responsible yourself as well in most instances.
Yeah,
so I think that
you can't blame the bot.
Exactly, they're going to do exactly what you ask them to do.
Yeah, I want to ask about some specific cases. As we apply RPA into procurement, and of the things that you have done, I wonder if there's one that perhaps you could share just to give a little bit more color and context, I guess, ultimately to what the power of RPA is. But then I'd like to talk a little bit about the process as well that you went through to get to essentially putting it into production.
Yeah, so I think one of the ones that I would look at is what we've just implemented. So we focused on automation across our source to contract process initially. And we looked in 3 areas. We looked at early engagement. We looked at the sourcing documentation that has to be created. Most procurement organizations have it in some form or another. And then we looked at the approval piece. So from an early engagement perspective, I mentioned, we implemented guided buying, which provides an Amazon-like type of experience for users. But it's the tile-based front end that we used with, we used RPA and APIs, if you like, to extract information from the engagement tile that we created, to populate sourcing projects and assign them to category leads in the team. So initially what would happen is somebody would pick the phone up, talk to someone in procurement or email them. And we're not saying that still doesn't happen. Yeah. I'm sure it does, but we wanted to give them a centralized way of actually engaging with us. And that's what we kind of created. And the information that the stakeholder would populate in the form would automatically create a sourcing project, so no one has to rekey that information in again, and it would assign it to the relevant person as well through automation. So that was one of the things that we've looked at. The real benefit though comes from the sourcing documentation. So we looked at if you like 3 main forms, which are things like we have something called a bid waiver, which is required where we have direct negotiations with the supplier rather than going through RFX, a summary of award, which is a summary of the deal itself that's been negotiated, and OFAC checks. So if you're in financial services, you know that's the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. It's a regulation where we're required to ensure that any third party we're dealing with is not on the US Treasury sanction list. Yeah. And what we've done there is said, well, if you use Ariba, for example, like we do as a PM tool for any of our projects, and we update it regularly saying what we're doing, where we are with it, and what the outcomes are, we're extracting key elements from the fields that we've got within Ariba and pre-populating these forms and saving them in draft format so that you can still look at it and change it for fit and finish. But a large part of it, 80% of that form has been completed on your behalf. So you don't have to take this information and rekey it in another form. So it's really saving a lot of time and effort in creating these forms. The OFAC checklist is the one exception. That's an end-to-end automation. So it'll take the supplier's name, go to the US Treasury website, input the supplier, take a screen capture of the screen to say, oh, this is either they are on the list or they're not, and then it feeds it back into Ariba and stores it within the project as well. So there's some of the things that we've looked at from a sourcing documentation, and then the approval is our VP of sourcing is going to sign off on any of these deals. He wants to ensure that all of the correct documentations that are in place before he signs off. And they're normally all, we used to use e-signature tools, right? Because that was the thing. To streamline, we'd use the e-signature tools. But they still need the documents to be uploaded into the e-signature tool and so on. And what we've done is we've moved away from there and said maybe what we can do is we use RPA to to merge all these documents into one, and then we use Ariba to kind of as the approval for the Ariba approval flow to get that timestamped approval as well.
Yeah.
So we've kind of moved away from the e-signature tool to get the authorization, and we've gone back into Ariba, and it kind of helps because from an audit perspective, all of the information is now in one tool as well. So that was really end-to-end, the 3 stages that we looked at for source to contract, where we had identified some quick wins within for RPL.
Yeah, there's a lot of efficiencies in there, but also extracting information. It's interesting as well to hear about basically an automated triage. So as you've got your guided buying, and for those who have seen guided buying, you basically have a choice of, you can go to a catalog, you can buy something from a marketplace, kind of consume the transaction right there. Or if you're buying something that's a little bit more complex, you can then select, I want to buy, and it depends on how you configure it, but let's just say I need to buy some marketing services, or I need to buy a consultant in X, and those are things that aren't in a catalog. So it can then drive you down to the right buyer, but usually that goes to a triage desk, and that triage desk is a couple of individuals, but now you've automated that process, so it doesn't need to be triaged, and I imagine it increases the speed of the process as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We weren't going to look at, I think at the time, we weren't interested in the triage desk. We were actually looking at a lot of these categories, most of the people, to be honest, as well, within the business, the category leads have got the relationships within the business as well. So folks reach out to them directly. Yeah. And this was just another medium for them to be able to capture some of that information and save them from doing some of that work effort as well. Yeah. So it's always going to come through to this particular team. Yeah. They're always going to be working on it, and they and themselves would decide who can go on and actually conduct the activity, and it all heads up. It's all headed up by the category lead.
Now, in terms of building and deploying the automation, I guess I have a couple of questions in terms of the people that you needed at the table to make that happen. But I want to start from a provider perspective. You talked about Ariba being the system that you're kind of integrating with as you do this. Now, does this need, and this can apply to any provider, it's not just Ariba, but just using Ariba as the example because that's who you use. Does that require Ariba resources to support the integration? Or are you just basically using APIs and extracting information from, fields as they've already been configured? And so it's really just, I say just, but you're doing it internally. You don't need to be partnering with the provider of the technology. How did that work?
You don't need to, but it's probably a good idea, I would say, because I think in transparency, helping them understand what you've worked on, where you're working on it, and for them to understand from an API perspective, whether the APIs that they've got are actually providing you with what you need. It's far more stable to use the APIs than not to use them as well. So I would suggest working with them.
Yeah. Sure. How does it change, like if they push out an update, which is obviously the nature of cloud and SaaS, does that change all the connections, or do you...
Good question. That's why I think the APIs are probably is a far more stable means of actually going down the route of using the APIs over and above just RPA. You can use it in conjunction with them as well, but the APIs would help drive some of that stability. But not all of the functionality that you're looking for currently exists in the APIs today. So short term, yes, there may be some work effort that's required as things are updated. You may get to see that, but long term, you should be moving away from the things that you've put in place and helping move towards the APIs themselves.
And how much internal support do you need from IT to make this happen as well, like technical support?
So I've worked heavily with our procurement IT systems, and I can tell you that if without their help, this would have been a nightmare. So they've provided some real strong IT support for me personally as part of this project, and I think those folks, we've had folks within the business, so procurement people to work on the actual project as well, and then we used a third party as well to help provide support with the develop the actual bots themselves. And then we actually use the COE from an infrastructure perspective, and also from a design authority perspective as well. So any kind of work that's going on, there are standards that MetLife has set, and we have to realize those and get sign off on anything that we're actually creating. And they all go hand in hand, I think, all of them. So any kind of testing that you're going to be doing as well, because you're going to need the IT folks, because it's all happening in the Ariba environment for us. We want to ensure that IT is involved.
Yeah, it's definitely a team effort. And there'll be some listeners who are listening to this and want to just try, perhaps a specific use case because they just want to pilot something and they don't have an overarching strategy. They don't have a COE. Is IT the place to go to start the conversation? To at least figure out, where would we even start trying to do something? What would you be the first meeting that you schedule?
It's an interesting question, because I think if you're going around trying to find a problem for which RPA is the solution, I think you're gonna, it's almost like you've already got the answer. You're just looking for the problem, and I don't think that's probably the right approach. What you'd probably find in most instances, as you're going through the assessment, like I was mentioning earlier on, we looked at 4 areas. The first one may be stop doing things. That's the best form of automation, just not to do something. Streamlining, not automation. Best form of streamlining a process. And I think that's the key part of it, is as you go through your assessment, if you've got the criteria that helps you understand what's going to make a process better suited to some form of automation. So I guess a quick rule of thumb would be high average handle time, high volume kind of activity. They're not the only 2 factors. Obviously, there's several criteria within that. But if you were just looking at those 2, it's to very quickly gauge which processes would make sense. Usually people will look at specific things and think this is going to be great for us, but it doesn't end up that way. And it's because they haven't actually gone through the exercise of saying, here's the criteria. Is it rules based? Does it have a high average handle time? Is there significant volume there? And this will make sense to actually put in place some form of automation. We have to go through, for any type of investment in automation, we have to go through what's called a PAR form, which is, a project approval. And that's kind of robust enough to say, there's you need at least a certain percentage of an ROI there as well to realize, and that helps focus the mind as to what processes we should be looking at when you start adding all the costs associated with working on any of these projects. You quickly realize that there are opportunities out there, but not all of them cut the mustard when it comes to getting an ROI, getting the right kind of ROI as well.
And don't just do automation for the sake of automation.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great idea.
Yeah, but it's tempting because you're kind of interested in doing it as a pilot, maybe, or dipping your toe into the water. But may cause more problems long term than it solves.
Yeah, I think you go slow to go fast, right?
Yeah.
You actually do the work up front. You do the assessment, and that will help you understand where you can actually dip your toe in, rather than saying, I think that probably sounds like a great idea, until you've actually gone in and assessed it to determine whether that process is stable, whether it's got the right criteria associated with it from a work effort perspective as well. Until you've done that kind of work up front, I think you're going to struggle to understand whether the process is ripe for automation.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have the automation in place. How do you kind of provide oversight? How do you govern the bot to make sure that it is doing what it should do?
Yeah, so it's actually a very good question, because what we've done is we're looking at our organization to understand how we work with the COE, what we're going to be responsible for, what they should be responsible for. Part of our work is we're using our COE to help provide virtual resource managers. They manage the bots, they monitor them. And then, we're going to look to build our own skill set, hopefully, within procurement to say, we've got the people that can assess processes and configure the bots themselves as well. They may sit within the COE but we're hoping that they'll be dedicated to
procurement centric.
And that's something that, so we're kind of looking at that kind of approach to say, does that model make sense to provide oversight and governance for these bots and for any types of change management kind of processes as well?
Yeah, and I think it seems, at least at surface level, that it would make sense because there's so many nuances in process that, if you just look at a process as it's written and think, and let's just say we're doing this for an efficiency play, we've mapped out a process, an as-is process from today, you still miss a lot of the nuance and unintended consequences of certain actions or decisions or whatever it may be if you don't really understand the process itself. I think that's where that procurement expertise comes in.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key factors in this is how are current changes made to processes and to systems. Mm-hmm. And usually you'll find it's requests made by individuals within the procurement organization of IT or just making them themselves if it's related to a process around the category that they manage. And even that needs some level of governance and oversight because it will impact the bots as well. So there needs to be more of a formalized process for any kind of change request.
Yeah.
That whether it's process or systems that would have some kind of oversight, some kind of body that would have to be created to manage that.
Yeah, at least a governance board or committee or at least some formal structure.
And it begs the question, and it begs the question from an operating model: do you have the right skill sets as well, and which ones are missing, and what are you going to do to bring those in as well?
So you've obviously done a lot of work on starting to automate. What I like about what you're doing is that you're looking in source to contract. I don't want to say it's easy because that's an unfair characterization, but a lot of folks will look at P2P as being the place to start, and maybe they'll look at investing all their resources in automating the P2P process as much as they can, and kind of leave the source to contract as the domain of, well, that's the people are doing this work, and I'm just not going to go there because it's too complicated. But the fact that you're actually looking at the source to contract process, I think, is excellent because it's a harder place to go, a more nuanced place to go. But I wonder, now you've kind of got a couple of automations that are up and running, like what's next? Where's the next place that you go? Is it looking deeper within source to contract, negotiations, looking at P2P? I'm just interested of what's on the roadmap.
Yeah, so first off, what I would say is the source to contract option to select it, it's really done. We looked at our stakeholders, we presented the opportunities to them, and it's our leadership that helped us decide that this is where they would like to go. So I can't take credit for that. That's something that they'd actually helped identify as an area that they'd like. And to be honest, from my perspective, that's fantastic. They're also my stakeholders. Yeah. They're telling me this is what they'd like. So from that perspective, it's a great one to work on. It's something that is being asked of us rather than us trying to force it on someone else.
Yeah.
So that's always good. And then from what's next in the journey, well, we, as part of the assessment, that's the beauty of the assessment. If you do a full assessment, we've got 20 to 30 opportunities in our register. And this consists of fully vetted opportunities. Some of them are fully vetted, about 15, let's say, of those are fully vetted. And the rest are suggestions submitted via a SharePoint site that we've basically created. And that's open to anyone in procurement to submit their ideas for automation. So people have ideas within, now they've got used to looking at the automation, working with it, and have seen what it can do. They can help submit some of those ideas, and the idea being, what we have this tool is, we would go through certain phases, whether it's qualified, right, and then it's validated as well, and then you can say, okay, this is now one of the opportunities that goes into the opportunity register, and every time we look at that register, we may reprioritize them depending on what the view is from leadership as well, and select something from there. And that covers everything from looking at our master data, for example, right? Or looking at reporting. And so it covers P2P, it covers reporting. It can look at some of the reports that we've coming out of travel ops, for example. We could look at some of those things as well. So there's a real end-to-end view of opportunities that we've got, and some of them would have to, we're going to have to relook at them. So, there may have been opportunities in certain parts of, let's say, third-party risk management, but we're bringing in a tool and looking to put the tool in and make use of that tool to help streamline some of those processes. So there's, again, I would never look to implement any type of automation there up until that process is BAU, running BAU for me. So those are the kinds of things we've looked at everything, honestly, from travel ops, buying, more within sourcing, market research, all of that can come within within the assessments that we've done so far.
And I'm sure that when you start to get, for example, when you're bringing in suggestions from your peers across procurement and ultimately validating them, bringing into a register, you probably see opportunities that are that compound the impact of others. So what I mean is, you don't need to do all these in isolation. There may be 5 ideas that come into the register that actually are part of a bigger process that you're looking at automation for, and so they're enhancements as opposed to just standalone changes.
So absolutely. So one of the things that you'll find is that there's work being, I'll give you an idea. There may be work being done by folks in a sourcing capacity that should really be conducted by buyers, for example, right? There could be that kind of work. And so when I was just looking at the buyer activity, I may have excluded all of this work and not realized it was taking place. So when the ideas start coming through, you start seeing, well, actually, this makes the business case for the other piece of work even better. And so you can kind of assign some of this, categorize some of the work better, and you get visibility into more of the work effort that's taking place as well.
Well, Mahmood, I know it's about time to start wrapping up. This has been a really fascinating conversation because I think that in all the talk about digitization and automation, we don't talk enough about, well, actually, what has been done and how was it done and what actions can I take? And it's things like that start to take, to make it real. It takes it from being kind of marketing hype to, I'd not thought of that. Or now that somebody else is doing it, perhaps it demystifies it for me. So I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank you for sharing what you've shared with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the very last question, and this is, as I often say, the easy one. And I do want to say as well, I've been really thankful that I have a fellow Bradfordian on the podcast, finally. It's taken me 4 years plus, but even though, I'm now in Orlando and Mahmood's in New York City, we're both from like 10 miles apart from each other in the city of Bradford in England. So we've been able to reminisce about, living in Yorkshire and cricket, as we've chatted off mic. So, that's one that I'm proud of now. We've got Bradford on the map. But
likewise,
if folks are interested in reaching out to you directly, what's the best way of them doing so?
I think LinkedIn would be the best approach, in my opinion. Yeah. Okay.
What I'll do is I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile on the show notes for today's episode. And listeners, you can go to artofprocurement.com/podcast. And you'll just be able to search on RPA or on MetLife. And if it's not been a show that's in the last couple of weeks, you'll find it through there. If it's only, if you're searching in September, October, you're going to see it like on the list of the shows that we've just had. So I will include all the details of today's show and Mahmood's LinkedIn profile link on the show notes. So with that being said, one last time, I want to really thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Philip.
All right, thanks. Hi there, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.